let's say a mistake happens. There's a mistake. As a CNS, the way I investigate mistakes is I go into it with the mindset, how did the system fail the nurse? And you have to go into it with those attitudes because it's the system that failed. And so as a CNS, your job is to figure out what is that system issue and let's fix it. How do we fix it? But hospitals will say, oh no, a mistake was made. It's an education problem. Sarah, get out there and do in-services in all the units on whatever. That's not usually the problem. The problem is it was a system issue.
Hey there, I'm your host, Sarah Lorenzini, a rapid response nurse and educator who loves telling stories to teach critical thinking. This podcast is for nurses who want the knowledge, skills, and confidence to respond to any emergency. With almost 20 years of experience in the ER and critical care nursing, and a master's degree in nursing education, I have a lot of stories to share, and I love to nerd out and break down the pathophysiology, pharmacology, and nurses' role in emergencies. Stories bring learning to life. It is way easier to learn from and remember the stories that my colleagues and mentors have told me than anything I've read in a textbook. And that is why I made this podcast. Every episode is packed full of exactly what you need to know to handle whatever crisis that could arise on your shift. It's one thing to get the right answer on the test, but knowing how to detect when your patient is declining and what to do when your patient is crashing is what will make or break your day and might just save your patient's life. Welcome back to the Rapid Response Room podcast. Today, I am so excited to have the special guest. I have Nicole Kupchik with me. Nicole, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Sarah.
So happy to have you. So I feel like every critical care nurse probably knows who you are, but for those of you that don't know, Nicole is like the OG of critical care nursing education. I have been learning from Nicole for years. I have purchased her courses. I have watched her speak at NTI. Like, I am going crazy right now that I have Nicole with me on my podcast. This is such a privilege. So Nicole's really good at breaking down complex clinical concepts, but I've actually invited her on the podcast today to educate us about the role of the clinical nurse specialist. So I've done a couple episodes because nurses ask me all the time, should I go back to school? And the answer is maybe, but you should really know what's out there before you invest all that time and money into graduate level education. And so I've had a nurse educator, I've had a nurse practitioner, and now I have a clinical nurse specialist. And who better to explain the role of clinical nurse specialist than Nicole Kupchik? So Nicole, can we back it up? Tell my listeners your story, how you got into nursing, and what interested you about the clinical nurse specialist role.
So I just embarked on my 31st year of nursing, or I should say 31 years have passed. But yeah, I went into nursing. I was not one of those people who grew up wanting to be a nurse, like at all. I literally graduated high school and was super lost. I was raised by my grandparents. They were from Poland and they were immigrants. And my grandmother died of a medical error my senior year of high school. Yeah, it was a pretty bad error. And she had a cardiac arrest and ended up with hypoxic ischemic or anoxic brain injury. And I spent a lot of time in the hospital. She was in the hospital for 6 weeks. We had to go to court to get her off the ventilator back in you can imagine, like 1990, right? Healthcare was such a mess. And I was just super lost. And I went because I grew up in the Chicago area. So I went to Purdue Northwest and just met with a guidance counselor. Like, what do I do? I want to go to college, but I was so stressed out, like with her being sick, I didn't know what to do. And she's like, well, have you thought about nursing? I'm like, no, like such a female thing, right? So I applied and I got in. Like I was shocked to get in. And so I don't have any like crazy story of like, oh, I was born to be a nurse. Not at all. But I will tell you the best decision I ever made was to get into nursing. And so when I got into nursing, one of the things always in my head was just modeling nurses that I appreciated in my grandmother's care. And so I really was always about quality and I wanted hospitals to be a safer place. I mean, if you can imagine, when I first started as a nurse in 93, we used to cover up mistakes. We used to like literally hide them. We would do slow codes where it's basically the patient's not a DNR and we're not going to have the conversation, but we're just going to be really slow, like getting the crash card over to the patient. Like, it's just so messed up, right? And so in the 90s, there was this amazing transformation into being transparent. and a bigger focus on quality. And I just like was watching like this whole patient safety culture explode, and I loved it just because of my past experience. And then fast forward to the 2000s, and I'm like, I was just ready. I was ready for something different. I had been a manager, not my jam. Managing, I just want to say this. I'm going to put a plug out there for managers. Hardest job in the world, managing. And when you think about ratios of employees to a manager that nurse managers are expected to handle, it's not, there's no other industry that has that many direct reports to them. No other industry at all. And so anyway, wanted to go back to grad school. I knew I didn't want to be a nurse practitioner because my goal wasn't to take care of individual patients. I knew I didn't want to be locked down in a dark OR for the whole entire day. I would just go crazy being a CRNA. I mean, props to everyone who does it. Just wasn't for me. Midwife, no way. We're like going to paint with the first, So I looked at the clinical nurse specialist role. It was just a perfect match. It's about quality, promoting education, promoting evidence-based practice. That was exactly what I wanted to do.
Yeah, you're definitely wired for it. If you were to describe the difference between the role of a CNS versus, say, a nurse leader versus a nurse educator versus a nurse practitioner, like what makes CNS different or unique than those roles?
Yeah, so interestingly, in grad schools, all my courses were with nurse practitioners. So the nurse practitioner and the CNS, you basically all of the requirements are the same. So we take the exact same courses. The only thing that was different was our clinical. And so I went to a very intensive program at the University of Washington. It was one of the I hold my program in such high regard, and unfortunately, they don't have the program anymore, which was really sad. But it was very rigorous. It was Monday through Friday in person classes. So I worked every weekend. So if you can imagine 7 days, no break. And I did that for 18 months. But, I did it. I conducted my own study. I was a PI. I went to IRB. I learned how to interpret research. I feel confident looking at a research paper saying, yeah, this is something I'm going to change in a hospital, or no, we need to kind of hold our horses, kind of like wait to see what other evidence shows. Like that is what we are taught. So when people ask me like, what's the difference between an NP and a CNS? Because that's the biggest comparison I would make, is that a CNS is in charge of a system and quality, whereas a nurse practitioner is in charge of an individual patient. I used to joke with my nurse practitioner friends, like, I write the orders that you have to carry out. I jokingly say that. It's a joke. Please don't take that the wrong way. But we would just kind of joke back and forth about, like what a CNS does versus like what a nurse practitioner does. Nurse practitioners, again, you have to understand if you're going to go to grad school, like what are you getting into? And is this for you? For me, taking care of individual patients, doing shift work was not what I wanted. I wanted something where I could just make a massive impact on the hospital as a system.
What I have observed, again, I'm not a CNS or a nurse practitioner. Nurse practitioners have a pretty routine schedule. Like you work these clinic hours, you're in the hospital for these shifts. It's pretty like expected. Here's what you'll do. CNSs have to be pretty creative with their role and just like they find a problem and then they just have to figure out the solution. So there's a lot more like autonomy and like, how are we going to collectively, interdisciplinary, interdepartmental, pull this thing off? You have to be someone who likes to solve problems to do well in the CNS role.
100%.
So it's not like, here's the task that's just put in front of your plate. Go see these patients, go write these orders. It's like, here's the problem. Can you please solve it? CNS.
Yes. And you have to, like, if you're one of those people who's really into instant gratification, the CNS role is not for you. These are roles where, so let me just back up. So my first CNS job was at Harborview Medical Center in Seattle. So it's the only level 1 trauma center for 4 states. It's a very, very busy, very high acuity hospital. And there had never been a CNS for the areas I was covering. So I covered cardiology. So I was in charge of the medical cardiac ICU, telemetry, cath lab, and then all the CMS measures that have to do with patients in those areas. And there had never been a CNS over those areas. And so to even get my CNS role, I wrote a proposal. To our administrators and told them these will be my 90-day goals, my 6-month goals, my 1 year and 2 year goals in this role. And so my administrator, she's amazing.
How could they say no?
I mean, money, right? That's how you
Yeah.
say no, is money. It's a county hospital, public funding, challenging. But I was able to show them, and I'll be honest, I worked with some really experienced, I should say I was mentored by some very experienced CNSs, like all over the country, in like, how do I do metrics for and show my value? And they decided to hire me into this role. And then just fast forward 5 years later, when I left, I was replaced by 3 people, 3 CNSs. So the thing too is like, I am really good. Like, I love solving problems. And one of the things I saw, now, mind you, this is back in the mid 2000s, is like we had septic patients dying who shouldn't have been dying, or just being massively fluid overloaded, or not getting the right antibiotics. So one of the first things I targeted was starting a sepsis program. And my motto was always, because I am not into falls and restraints and skin. It's not my special. It's not my jam. It's important. Don't get me wrong. Like, it's not that I ignore that. I just don't want to be in charge of it. Right? So my motto is, I'll keep myself busy in these other areas so that I don't get tapped to be in charge of the restraint committee. Right? Kudos to everyone who's in charge of the restraint committee. I just knew I would not be the best person for that role. So anyway, I started a sepsis program, and it was one of the first in the country. And I don't want to say just me by myself. There was a team of us, a huge team. And I worked side by side with our intensivists, who are amazing, our ER docs, and we won multiple awards. We conducted one of the biggest studies where we basically looked at patient deterioration and what predicts it, because we all know SIRS criteria are just kind of BS, like everyone's got them, and so we looked at different criteria. We created a program which now we called machine learning, but now you'd call it AI, where we found that basically a change in a vital sign was far more predictive than a vital sign itself. Changes were more predictive than actual vitals and things like that. It was groundbreaking, cutting edge, some of the things we were doing there. And so it's pretty cool to be part of that. We won multiple awards for that program because the first year we showed an $18 million cost avoidance, $18 million cost avoidance. Let that sink in for a minute. So how can a hospital not afford to have CNSs? I'll never understand.
Right. No. Yeah, great point. So my question for you, so when I went to grad school, I learned specifically how to be an educator. They're like, this is the way you write test questions. Here's how you evaluate your students, like very focused on education. What types of things did they teach you in your graduate program that prepared you for the multitude of random things that you were in charge of as a CNS?
Well, I mean, to be honest, like, they set the foundation, but really a lot of it, as a CNS, first of all, let me just back up and say, like, a new grad should not be going into a CNS program. A CNS is considered to be the expert of the hospital. And, so, as I went into that program having, 13 years experience at the time. So I was able to draw on a lot of my past experience. They do teach you some foundation for sure, 100%. But a lot of it is just, it's diving in and doing. One of the things I was never shy about is like just getting on the calendars of like my chief nursing officer or chief medical officer. Like, he knew me really well, right? The other thing, our CFO, like, I got on his calendar, because if the CFO knows what you're doing and knows that you're doing things that cost avoid,
Yep.
you're probably going to get a yes when you ask for things
Right.
down the road. Yeah. So a lot of it was just kind of, I had the advantage of working in a system, knowing that system, and I could take what I applied and try to solve problems. But I'll be honest, for me, I tried to be super visible in my hospital to the nurses, to the bedside nurses. And the reason is that they are the eyes and the ears of the hospital. So if there's something that's wrong or something that's problematic, I wanted them to feel comfortable coming to me and letting me know. So I ran our Code Blue committee, our door to balloon times for STEMI patients, got really comfortable with the ED nurses so that they knew like who to go to if there were issues. And the sepsis program, we had a huge ARDS program, so it was, I felt like the nurses like that, they were like the lifeline for me to figure out how to fix system issues. When people come to me with problems is like, what are some ideas for solutions? Like, where do you think we need to target? Because I don't always have the best solutions or what I think might be the best solution. If I'm no longer like in the trenches taking care of individual patients, then I need to listen to the bedside nurses who are. And I'll tell you, I was one of those CNSs, my other CNSs, I'm sure like rolled their eyes at me, but I was a 14-year night shifter. And so every 6 weeks I do a week of night shift. And I was very dedicated to that. And so my butt would show up at like usually 10 o'clock at night. I'd stay till about 3 a.m. most times. And just to see and round in the units. So like nurses saw me, they knew. And I'll tell you, you find out everything from the night shift, especially the rapid response night shifters, right? Because they know what's going on. They know the problems. And we were able to really combat and solve a lot of problems. Like our resuscitation code blue. I mean, every hospital, I'm sure, has felt that it was a mess at some point. And I just kept hearing that there were issues. And so we started doing mock codes. And like literally 4 times a month, we put a mannequin in a bed and call a code to it. No one knew it was a mock code. And it wasn't just the nurses. It was the entire team that was expected to respond. And, you figure out system issues by having your team work together, practice together, learn together. That's how you get better.
Absolutely. So my next question is the title, Clinical Nurse Specialist. You are the expert in your specialty. But there's all types of CNSs, right? Oncology CNS, critical care CNS, cardiology. So to achieve that title, that level of expertise, is that something that they taught you in your graduate program, or did you have to come in with expertise already under your belt?
No, you come in. It's expected that you come in with expertise. That is the expectation of. Then, of course, like you specialize your program. So, for example, I was a new grad critical care nurse. That's where I started. I've worked critical care, progressive care, cath lab, like that whole area was my jam and my specialty. And so I came in with that experience. So everything I did, like, for example, like in my research class, all the papers I wrote were all critical care focused.
So you became even more of an expert in the process of gaining your CNS.
Next level.
Yeah.
Yeah, next level expert. Yeah, truly. So you come with that experience and then you just take it to the next level.
And it sounds like as a CNS, obviously the role looks a little different in every hospital system. Yeah. And you kind of got to write your own role. Like, I don't want to do these tasks, but I do want to make an impact in this area.
Yeah.
So this might be a hard question to answer. What does a day in the life of a CNS actually look like? What do you do all day? What kinds of things are keeping you busy?
Every day is different. That's the thing is, every day is different. And like, unfortunately, you do get bogged down with meetings. But here's the deal about meetings is like, if you don't show up to the table, you don't have a voice. And I was kind of like that pain in the butt person who would always speak up. Well, about like, hey, I know, everyone, you all think this is a great idea sitting in your office, but here's the reality of what nurses are facing. And that's not a good idea. So I felt like I tried to really be the voice of the bedside. It's not just nurses, respiratory therapists as well. I did so many projects and so much work with respiratory therapists, PT, OT, it was more than just bedside nursing. It was everyone who was working at the bedside and tried to really be that voice. And, a lot of times, like when I knew meetings were coming up where, it'd really impact the bedside nurse, I would bring a bedside nurse with me who was maybe on the unit practice council or who had a bigger voice in the unit to be there and speak up and say, here's why this may not work, or here's why this would really work, So I really feel like bedside nurses need to have a voice. And I tried to be that voice, when I didn't have someone there to be the voice.
Right. So I think I've heard pretty clearly what makes the job awesome. Process change, systems improvement, like collaboration, making an impact on health. That sounds, sign me up, right? But what were the challenging aspects of being a CNS? What were the things that you would lay in bed at night and be like, this is so frustrating? What are the obstacles you had to overcome? Hey guys, I'll get back to the show in just 1 second. But before I do, I have a request. If you have ever gotten any value from this podcast and you want the show to continue to grow, to access more awesome experts in the field, and to keep providing you with more nursing knowledge and inspiration, could you take a minute to leave a rating and a review? Those reviews on Apple and Spotify go a long way in getting this podcast in the hands of more nurses and bringing new guests to the show. And they just make my day to know that my stories and nerdy patho breakdown are helping other nurses thrive, or at least survive. So if you're feeling up to it, I'd love to see a rating and review from you. Thank you so much. Now back to the show.
Yeah, well, I think the biggest thing is just knowing that like things don't happen overnight. So, for example, like the sepsis program was a 5-year project. And how do I keep people interested for 5 years? That's a really long time. And so, one of the things I would do, because you do have to have meetings, right? Like, meetings are essential to get things done, to communicate, to effectively communicate. And so, one of the things I would do is I would always send out an agenda before the meeting and people could kind of pick and choose, like, do I think, you need to be there? But I would always do a reminder, here's where we started. Here's our timeline. Here's where we are now. Here's where we're going. And try to really share that vision with everyone. I think that's key. But keeping people interested is a massive challenge. Myself staying interested when things aren't moving along was a massive challenge. I'll be honest, the hours, the hours were my decision. So that's only up to me. No one made my schedule for me. No one managed my schedule. No one mandated my schedule. My schedule was done by myself, and I worked a lot of hours, like way too many. So like if I had a do-over in that initial job, I probably would just scale back a little bit, just knowing like you can't do it all. But I tried to do it all. So those were some big challenges. Just kidding. I think one of the things I would do is anytime I was starting like a new initiative or new project is I literally would talk with me and the intensivist I was working with or the other nurses I was working with. Okay, if we're going to do this, who is this going to impact and who needs to have a seat at the table? And be super inclusive. And it's so interesting, like in meetings, like I don't want like a bunch of people who agree. That's not going to be helpful. I need people who are willing to speak up and say, okay, this is why this may not work. And versus like figuring things out later. Like I made a lot of mistakes as a clinical nurse specialist, and probably like one of the biggest mistakes I ever made was in 2010 when the AHA put out the guidelines around using capnography. And I'm like, oh, we're going to do this. It was so great. Did a ton of education on capnography. Here's how, and I didn't put anyone in charge of it. So you know what happens when you are bringing in a new therapy or a new device or a new something, and you don't make someone accountable or responsible for doing it, it doesn't get done.
Yeah.
So then I had to start over, do it all again because it wasn't getting done, So you learn by your mistakes. And I always would just say, like, who needs to be at the table? Who's going to have a say in this? Because the worst thing that can happen is if you've got something that's steamrolling forward and that's impacting people who were never given a voice. That's horrible, right?
Yeah. No, that's a good lesson learned for sure. So how long total have you been a CNS?
Oh, since 2008.
2008. Okay, good chunk of time. So since then, how have you seen the CNS role evolve? And then where do you see the CNS role going in the future?
Yeah, I'll be honest. I'm seeing it disappear, which is like bizarre to me. I'm seeing it like disappear in a lot of areas. And I've seen CNS programs close. There's some chunks of the country where they use a lot of CNSs and then others, and what's happening in hospitals, which I don't think is the right thing, is they're replacing the CNS and they're just saying, oh, let's just hire an educator. And it's like the training is so completely different. And it's nothing against educators. Educators are absolutely needed, but that's not what an educator is trained to do. I literally, as part of my program, ran a trial where I had to come in the middle of the night and enroll patients. And, I can tell you there's no educator program that does, things like that. I spent so much of my program learning to interpret research and literature. And that's just not the focus of an educator program. It's focused on quality. And so I'm honestly really worried, especially now that you've got many organizations saying, listen, you got to do this. If you don't do these things, you're not getting paid. So I don't understand why the CNS role isn't exploding.
Right.
And I think it's just kind of a perfect storm of people don't know what a CNS is, number one.
Mm-hmm.
They don't know how they're trained and what their roles are. And then they're hiring people just to kind of fill the gap. And then now you've just kind of lost that CNS role permanently. And so like if you are a CNS and you can't find a job, what I always tell nurses is apply for the educator jobs, go on the interview and ask questions and really decide, do they really want an educator or do they really need a CNS?
Yeah.
Because truly a lot of educator positions, really what they need are CNS roles.
I mean, 100% I agree with that, because when I was hired as the educator, I found myself discovering problems and trying to solve them with my education skills, but I have never had to come up with a proposal for a whole new process as an educator. I wrote test questions. I know how to present information. Like, I can do all that really well. I'd never, like, Excel spreadsheets and metrics and all that was so out of my wheelhouse. I mean, I figured it out. I found people that know how to do it and asked them tons of questions and watched YouTube videos, but that was not part of my training.
Yeah.
But I think the people that are driven or wired like a CNS, oh my gosh, to be honest, I wish I had known about CNS before I went to grad school, 15 years ago. I didn't even know it existed back then because our hospital didn't have them.
Yeah.
But yes, what you're describing, I'm like, oh my gosh, I wish I had that knowledge when I became the educator, the ER educator, because we had issues that needed to be solved. And I knew generally how to solve them, how to convince admin of the solution. That was the challenging part for sure. But yes, we need more CNSs. That's why I want you on the podcast to tell more nurses that exist and then how to find yourself in a CNS role.
Yeah, hospitals are even confused. Like they don't realize they need a CNS, right? Or the frustrating thing is that they'll post a CNS job and they don't get any applicants because, the CNS programs are dwindling and the numbers are dwindling. And it's just like, this role is needed now more than ever. Like more than ever, this role is needed. So, and again, I don't want anyone to take my comments about an educator wrong because educators are so needed. But a lot of hospitals, what they'll do, like for example, I saw this a gazillion times, is like, okay, let's say a mistake happens. There's a mistake. And, as a CNS, the way I investigate mistakes is I go into it with the mindset, how did the system fail the nurse? How did the system fail the nurse? And you have to go into it with those attitudes because rarely when a mistake gets made is it's a nurse just being stupid or dumb. That's not usually, I'm just using those words kind of flippantly, but it's the system that failed. And so as a CNS, your job is to figure out what is that system issue and let's fix it. How do we fix it? So it's a very different mindset. But hospitals will say, oh, no, a mistake was made. It's an education problem. Sarah, get out there and do in-services in all the units on whatever. That's not usually the problem. The problem is it was a system issue.
Yeah, I'm the chair of the Code Blue committee at my hospital, and that is exactly how it is. We'll see a mistake that's made, and people are like, oh, the nurse should have known to do this. I'm like, well, hold on. Why wasn't there a flag in the system? Why wasn't there, these are easy things to fix that maybe the nurse wouldn't have made that mistake if these things were in place ahead of time. Let's think bigger picture, not just let's train everyone in the hospital to check a blood sugar before giving it insulin. Duh. No, let's make systems to where it flags you. What is the blood sugar before you give insulin? These things sound basic, right? But those are the kinds of things that we need to look into and not just, let's do house-wide education on blood sugars.
Well, that was exactly how often it was the same thing with Code Blue. Because I don't know if people are aware, but resuscitation is one of the highest litigated areas in hospitals. So is it reasonable to call a code overhead and to have a random group of people who are coming because maybe they're free at the time, come to this patient who is the sickest patient in the hospital? And let's have the least experienced resident run the code, and let's have expectations that this is going to go well. No, that's not how this goes. And so when I took over as the Code Blue chair, the thing I implemented within the first year with the intensivist I was working with is very designated people respond to the code from units, and they have a maximum of 3 jobs when they run there to that code. Because how many times have you run to a code and you're like in your head, like, oh my God, we've got to do this, 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 this. That's cognitive overload. You're not going to do anything well, right? Massive cognitive overload. But if you're going to the code knowing as soon as I get in there, my job is to assess the rhythm and see if they need to be defibrillated. Or my job is to watch CPR quality. My job is to secure the airway and hook up capnography. So we changed our system. And guess what happened to our resuscitation outcomes?
What do you know? I'm sure they got better.
Yeah, way better. It was like 7% in the first year.
Wow. Yeah.
So, we focused, don't get me wrong, we did education. We focused on high performance CPR, minimizing pauses. And I mean, think about the year that we were doing this, 2005, 2006. So we focused on the basics with education for sure, but really it was a system issue that we were having because we were just expecting a random group of people who maybe not have been super users, super trained to come and perform well as a team. Like a lot of times in teaching hospitals, you don't even know the names of some of the people you're working with when you're in a code. So you had to have a system that was set up so that instead of it being it was basically about the roles around that bed and knowing exactly what your role was if you were in that position.
Right. And then partnering with the education team to educate those expectations throughout the hospital.
100%. I didn't have an education team though, so I did that too.
You were both. Bring both hats. CNSs wear lots of hats. Let's be honest. Lots of hats you're wearing.
No, for sure. But it's so funny that obviously I did a lot of education. I loved it.
And still do a lot of education.
I love education. I love seeing the light bulbs go off for people.
Yeah, it's very rewarding. I agree. So, okay, for the nurses out there listening that are like, what? This is the job? That is so who I am. This is exactly how I'm wired. I would love to be a CNS, but we don't have any at my hospital. How can they go about, like you did, building positions, explaining the why, making themselves a path towards becoming a CNS?
Well, so what I would say is if a CNS sounds like something you want to do, go to the program. And then what I would do is shop hospitals in your area and just ask for meetings. Like networking is everything. Let's just be honest. Like I'm where I am today because of networking. Truly, I've just, from day one, I've just tried to create a network, but, I sat down, I asked for a meeting with my critical care director. She's an amazing human being and just said, listen, this is what my role is. This is what I'm going to school for. This is how I think I can help. And she's like, well, I think we can free up the money, especially if you can show the ROI, let's trial it for, and you have to be realistic. If you're in trial, it needs to be for at least 2 years. Let's trial it for a couple of years and see what we do. And I mean, it was a no-brainer.
Yeah. So basically like doing some research to figure out where the needs are.
100. And trust me, there are needs everywhere. You want a low-hanging fruit need? Sepsis.
Sepsis. Yeah, I was going to say sepsis for sure. That's such a potential cost savings for hospitals if we can get sepsis right.
Huge. Well, and then the other, like heart failure exacerbations, huge. Again, huge, 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 low-hanging fruit. Even cardiology makes money. Let's be honest. Cardiology is the sexiest area in hospitals. It makes money, especially if you can go meet with a cardiologist and tell them what you do or what you can do for them.
Oh.
Cardiac surgery, you sit with a surgeon and tell them what you can do for them as a CNS, like it's a no-brainer. But I would say set yourself up for success from the beginning and show metrics. I always want baseline metrics. I want to know where we're at, and then I want to show that we're doing, that we're making improvements.
So as we close, Nicole, what advice would you have for a future CNS, for someone who's considering it? What would you tell them? What do you wish you knew whenever you started this whole journey?
I would say, if you feel like you want to be a problem solver, a system enhancer, a system fixer, and you're not into instant gratification, no, don't get me wrong. There's some things that you need instant gratification, but if you're one of those people who are in it for the marathon versus the sprint, this is totally the job for you. And if you are really passionate about making hospitals a safer place, it's the role for you. There's so much you can do as a CNS. And if you're doing it well, you can pretty much, I think in a lot of hospitals, you can help write the narrative of what needs to be done.
That's good advice. Nicole, thank you so much. This has been so valuable to hear from your perspective what CNSs do and how to become a CNS and the value that they play in healthcare. Before I let you go, I want people to know where they can find you and learn more from you. Can you just kind of share, where can people find Nicole Kupchik? What are you up to these days outside of being a CNS?
Yeah, so now, I've transitioned and I own a company where I am a CNS as an entrepreneur. My company just is having its 11th year anniversary. So I'm in Seattle, Washington, and you can find me on every social media, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook at Nicole Kupchik. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on, I don't know, YouTube. I've got lots of videos on YouTube. And so now I have a company where I will consult with hospitals as a clinical nurse specialist. And I have to say that's pretty awesome as an entrepreneur because I don't have to put up with all of the bureaucracy of hospitals now. Now I can just not be emotional, have you run your metrics. I show up and I usually can see your problem within 5 minutes, but I'll let you come to that conclusion of what your problem is at your hospital. But yeah, so I have a company where I do that. And then I'm also doing a lot of education. And one of the things I did at Harborview is I started doing CCRN reviews and then PCCN reviews. And I love it because nurses increase their knowledge and become better advocates at the bedside. And, I'm a true believer, every nurse should be certified. I have a lot of continuing education. So NicoleKupchikConsulting.com. Yeah. You just Google my name. You'll find me. Pretty easy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'll put links in the show notes for you guys so you can find her even easier. Nicole, thank you so much for your time. This has been excellent. I can't wait to share it with my listeners. Any closing thoughts before I let you go?
No, I think just, keep doing what you're doing. Keep speaking up, keep advocating. Patients need us right now. We're in a transition in healthcare and you are so needed at the bedside, so just keep advocating for your patients, keep learning. Don't ever stop learning because once you stop learning, you really should think about where your passion lies and if you need to change directions.
Amen. All right, Nicole, thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day. Before you go, I have an exciting announcement. You can now earn CEs for listening to this podcast. That's right. Our Renegade has teamed up with podcast hosts like me who are delivering amazing content that not only educates, but inspires you to be the best for your patients. You get to learn and earn continuing education credits while absorbing knowledge from thought leaders and innovators in the field of health and medicine. You're already listening to podcasts during your commute, at the gym, or while unwinding after a long day. So why not earn your CEs at the same time? And that's where pod classes come in. Yep, it's just what it sounds like. It's CE learning through podcast. To learn more, I put a link in the show notes for you. Well, thanks for listening. I hope you learned something that will save a life. Remember, nursing is a team sport, so trust your intuition and don't give up advocating until you are confident you've done what's right by your patient. The views and opinions expressed on this show are that of Sarah Lorenzini's. That's me and mine alone. They are not intended as medical advice and should not take the place of your institution's policies or procedures. Evidence-based practice is ever-changing, and your patient care should reflect the current best practice. So if you want to get in contact with me, you can shoot me an email at sarah@rapidresponsern.com or on all social media platforms as the Rapid Response RN.